Thank you, Jim, and I want to thank all you Rocky Mountain Steiners. You know, I have seen better weather out here than I have since January in Seattle. It's really been bad. But before we get started with occupationals, I just want to tell you a little story that happened to me on the way to Denver. And I got on the plane, and of course I wanted to get some rest. And here I am, you know, trying to go ahead and get a couple Z's. And in comes this person who sits next to me. And would you believe this person was a Matlock Stein collector? And he says to me, he says, you know, I'd like to play a little game with you. And I said, I really don't want to. I want to get some rest. And he was a very persistent guy. And he said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I will give you $5 if I asked you a question, and if you ask me a question and I can't answer it. And I'll do the same thing to you. I'll ask you a question, and if you can't answer it, you give me $5. I said, I want to get some sleep. So this went on. The guy would not take no. He went up and he said, I'll tell you what I'll do. If you can't answer my question, I'll give you $25, and then I'll only give you $5 if you can't answer yours. No, thank you. This went on for a while till we get up to $100. And he says, hey, you know, I will give you a $100 bill, a C note, if you can ask me a question, especially about my hobby that I can't answer, and I'll give you $100. And he said, but I will ask you a question, or if I ask you something and you can't answer it, you only have to give me $5. I said, that's a deal. Knowing he's a Matlock collector, and I'll call him Bob just for the heck of it. And I said, how many Matlock Steins were produced between 1880 and 1920? Bead of sweat started coming out. He didn't know what the heck was going on. He started getting out his reference books and everything else. In the meantime, I'm laying down getting a few Z's. We get into our approach in Denver. I said, well, do you have an answer to the question? He said, no. He said, I'm afraid I'm going to have to give you a $100 bill. So he reached in his pocket and gave me a C note. He said, well, by the way, how many Matlock Steins were produced between 1880 and 1920? I just got out mine and gave him $5. Oh, my. This is supposed to be programmed here. Okay. There we are. Working in a coal mine. This is a scene off of one of the occupationals of mining. That's enough of that. This is one of the different Matlock mining occupational you saw yesterday. And what we're going to do, we're going to talk about occupational beer steins, a tribute to the trades. I'm going to ask you 3 questions after you leave here. You should have a fairly good idea of what's going to be involved. What made occupational so important to the Germans? How do you identify an occupational stein? What are their characteristics? And what are the trades and professions you will find commemorate in occupational steins? And I don't have all the answers for all this, but hopefully we'll get started. Have you ever received a token of recognition at work? It could have been a pen and pencil set, it could have been a plaque, it could have been a gold watch, all kinds of things. Well, in Germany, when they wanted to recognize someone for the trade, or they were very proud of what they did, they used a stein. What's one of the first questions that asked to you if you go to a party and you don't know people? The first question probably asked after your name and some of that is, what do you do? We still today think that's very, very important. It's very interesting that Matlock, one of the premier stein producers, only made a few series of steins. Of course, the 2 largest being what? The occupational series. You have the professional series, on the top, and you have those starting at 2001 with the Cornell, and then you have law for A, medicine for B, C for the scholars, D for mathematics, E for natural science, architecture is F, engineering is G, forestry is H, I is technology, we miss J, K is commerce or banking, and then we get into mining. Then we get down to the bottom of the blue collar, or the trade steins, and they start from 2719 to 2730. And they are, from left to right, the baker, the tailor, the cabinet maker, the shoemaker, the carpenter, the mason, the artist, the goldsmith, printer, brewer, blacksmith, and the butcher. Now there's some wonderful articles, and Steve, congratulations, you wrote a wonderful article about book steins along with John Lamb in the Prosit December 94 issue. That was great. We also have some great articles written by Patricia Clark and John O'Connor in the Prosit of June 77, and of course Teresa Thomas wrote something in September of 94 saying that most of these occupational steins were designed by Otto Hopp, who lived very long. He was a very smart individual. He could spell his name forwards and backwards. Otto. To understand occupational steins, you need to understand a little bit about the German education system. And you have to have a basic understanding of this. So I'm going to provide a brief overview of the German educational system. At age 6 in Germany, you enter elementary school after kindergarten, which is optional, for 4 years, except in Berlin, sometimes you go to 6. All children attend elementary school together. The 5th and 6th grades attend orientation school, which is used as a transition to either pre-university or vocational schools. That's important. Pre to either university or vocational schools. And the academic high schools is one of them, the Commerce High School and the General High School. The academic high school lasts for 9 years, and that's the staging area to get the successful completion to get your Abitur. Once you get that, then you can go on to a university of your choice, if you can get in. Commercial high schools instruct in academic and business-related subjects. They last through the 10th grades. The diploma allows you admission into a business or a technical school. And then the general high school is a vocationally oriented school. After completion of 9th and 10th grade, you receive a diploma, and that will allow you to go on. Of course, when you go, you have a mandatory 8 to 12 hours of classroom instruction a week at this vocational school. We're going to concentrate on the vocational schools, and that is divided into two. A general high school, or Hauptschule, is a collaboration between state, private employees, and trade unions. It ensures national training standards, which is important, national training standards for every occupation. It also allows large companies to run their own trade schools. Of course, they must be state accredited. And a big thing of this is on-the-job training, which lasts about 3 to 4 days a week, and these people that do that usually act as an apprentice. Classroom instruction at these schools, about 40% basic academics, which include your languages, mathematics, and your sciences. The other 60%, you spend 1 to 2 days in classes in the vocation of your choice, and then you go and spend the rest of the time working as an apprentice. Occupational steins that we're going to talk about, we're going to focus between 1890 and 1935, and we're going to mainly be talking about the porcelain type of occupationals, which most of you know. The individual that wanted a occupational stein would go to a market tender and purchase it, making a selection from the shop samples. The shop would affix a transfer. They would complete the lettering, anything you wanted on it. They would send the stein to a local pewterer to have that taken care of. The lid, at that time, it cost about 5 to 7 marks, and it usually had 3 standard verses for an occupational stein, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Talk a little bit about the bodies. Basically, it's a blank, undecoated stein which they'd pick, and they would get this from one of the local pottery people in the area. Usually like the half-liter size, very few liter size. Most had built-up bases like the regimentals, and the regimental and occupationals, a lot of things I say are cousins. They really are. They're very closely related. And they had the raised frieze above and below the decorations. They have lithopanes if they're porcelain, and the lithopanes were commercially produced, and they usually had a scene of a boy and girl saying farewell, maybe a homestead scene of some type. Ludwig II would be up there once in a while, or they'd have a guest house scene with people at a table drinking. Lid types, they had the steeple or spindle type as found during that time period. The prism had 5 to 6 sides in a modified cone, just like their cousins, the regimentals, or they had a solid cast figure mounted on top. There's the steeple, or the spindle, that's very common to the occupational. Of course, you all recognize the prism, and again, the solid cast attachment. Thumb lifts, like their regimental cousins, often had representation of a state of origin. The crowned or uncrowned Prussian eagle, the rampant line and scroll of the Bavaria or Hesse, or they had the standard thumb lift found in that time period. I'm going to talk a little bit about decorations and transfers. It was a water transfer process, and most of these were made by Bergman in Hohenzollern-Dom in Strasse, and you're finding more and more occupations will have their name on the raised base. The transfers depicted a typical working scene of a tradesman, or had some type of an occupational guild, or had a coat of arms. The transfer process made by transferring the scene of the stein was simple. You just took the transfer, made it wet, put it on the wet stein, and slid it off, and you would soak it. Once you had that on there, the stein was kept wet to reduce the air bubbles. Any bubbles were worked out while you were doing this. The transfers then were dry, or the steins were then dried and coated with a clear liquid glaze. Then they would fire them permanently and fix the transfer, which would fix the transfer to the stein. And then once in a while they would augment, especially the earlier ones during this period. They would take the hills, trees, clouds, and skies, and they would hand paint those in or shade those in. But later years, as the technique for making transfers improved, all that was on the transfer, and they did very little. Once in a while they would add a little enamel to go, but it was very, very infrequent to do that. The 3 phrases that are found on most occupational steins are Hoch lebe die, long live thee, whatever the trade is. Hoch lebe das ein elter Handwerk der, long live the noble handiwork of. Or soll die ver schulderben, alles verdurst ein sterben. And that would mean the world should come to an end before whatever that occupation should die of thirst. And this is very common to see these phrases on the steins. Tell you a little bit about my interpretation of why some occupationals are rare. Some occupational workers didn't make that much money, and they couldn't purchase the stein because at that time 5 to 7 marks was quite a bit of money. And people like that were the grave diggers, road sweepers, and such. They had some occupations that didn't have very many members, so you didn't see those. They were the tram operators, circus performers, or jewelers, or those type of people. Members of some occupations wanted to remain discreet. That would be like your teachers, judges, policemen, and things. They didn't want to go and advertise when they went to a guest house who they were or what they did. And of course, they had lack of pride, some people, and they didn't care. You know, they were, what would we say, servants, caretakers, and those type of occupations. Women occupations were not recognized: nurses, housewives, maidens, and prostitutes. I didn't put that on there. Occupational steins, now I bless Andre and everything else, but everything Andre printed in this last catalog was rare according to occupationals, and I didn't really agree with that, but that's beside the point. Who am I? But I developed a little chart here of what I consider the index of scarcity for occupational steins. Very easy to acquire, common, easily found, more than 10. Easy to acquire, uncommon, frequently found, 6 to 10. Hard to acquire, which I call rare, seldom found, 3 to 5, and then very hard to acquire, very rare, rarely found, 1 to 2. And that's sort of what I use to put these in to go ahead to determine the rarity of an occupational Stein. I want to introduce you with PIMPAT. And this is a mnemonic device that I've developed to help me remember the various categories of occupational Steins. I've taken the occupational Steins and I've divided them into 6 categories. You'll see PIMPAT over here on the left marching in. Phil Mason, I'm repuked at Tony's Tavern. And that stands for professionals, merchants, public servants, agriculture, tradesmen, and transportation. We have the professional, and they'd be occupations like doctor, lawyer, engineer, architect, priest. The merchant would be the butcher, the tailor, the candlestick maker, all those type of things. Public servant would be the fireman, the brigade worker, fire brigade workers, postman, railroad worker, road repair people. Agriculture would include such things as farming, the shepherds, the dairy people, the cheese makers. Carpenters would be tradesmen, cabinet makers, coopers, miners, printers, mechanics. And then we get down to transportation, which I divide into 2 areas. Your people haulers and your hauler of goods, okay? And you can see what they would be. Components of what I consider make up a great occupational. Okay, I think a good occupational should have a full scene, and what I mean by that is it should go from handle the whole way around the Stein to the other side to the handle. It should be composed of people doing an occupation, and if they have their product, that's all the better. And this is sort of in priority order, by the way. The occupation should be unique. It should not just be a butcher. It should be something that you don't find every day. It has the name of the occupational owner somewhere on the body, just not a picture and no name. It should be named. It should have 1 or more of the 3 verses we just talked about just a little while ago. And then again, we get down to the aesthetics. It should be visually perfect. The lithophane should be without cracks. And the porcelain should have 1 of the 3 types that we had talked about for the lid. I'm going to talk a little bit about Steins. I'm going to show you some slides. And to do this, they aren't all that good because I usually have a wider screen. And we're going to turn the lights down just a little bit if we could, and we're going to show you some slides now, some occupationals. Just bear with me, man. I have to ace this thing out. Modern technology there. Okay, can you all see this fairly good? This is for a cheese maker, and basically it's a scene of some people there stirring some milk and whatever, making some cheese. They divide cheese makers into a Schweizer, and this is a cheese that was made high up in the Alps, and we call it today Swiss cheese. So these people made Swiss cheese. This is, and we're going to show this, a common farmer. This is one of the occupationals. It's easy to acquire. It's around quite a bit, and it has the trade, and it goes the whole way around the Stein. This is for a thresher. This guy went around to help the various farmers to bring in their crops, and he owned and operated a thresher business. This is for a milker. He would get up in the morning and do his milking to go and provide for his family. This is a dairy type of occupation. I'm going to show you the full scene of this. Now, this is what I would call a good Stein. You can see the owner's name in the bottom. It has a coat of arms there. We start on the porch side. You can see the back, the kettles and everything with the guy doing his things, and they actually made whey. Curds and whey, you've heard of that. This is where they made the whey. And you can see here the belts and things with the mixers and how things happen. This is for a shepherd. Of course, this is full-bodied and has a sheep, and these come in different varieties, okay? But this is for a shepherd or sheep herder. Now we're going to talk about forestry, and I have 4 scenes, and a lot of times when you get an occupational, you really do not know. You have to look at the occupation, study it, because it might just give a broad category like a Holzarbeiter, which is a forest worker, but then you start studying the scenes and things, and you can determine what they actually did in that profession. This was actually equivalent to a lumberjack, okay? They're the people who felled the logs and brought them in. We get here, this is a log transporter, and they would transport the logs, and you can see, we'll go ahead, this is full body also. You can see the side here where they're loading, and then also it addresses the ferry. They also took and brought the logs across by ferries in some places. This is the saw operator, the sawyer, okay? Again, full scene. This is what I consider a very good occupational Stein. It has the name of the people. This is now, after the wood was sawed, they would go ahead and put in a lumber yard, and this was the guy that worked in the lumber yard, okay? And you can see here, it's two sides that went through the saw on the one side, and the other side showed how they dried it to go ahead and they didn't have kiln dried machines in those days, so they stuck it up an end to go ahead and let it season. This is now, I think, less desirable. This is with a coat of arms, and you wouldn't know this, you really have to look at it, but this would be an occupational for a gardener. And of course this would be in the agricultural category. This would be a colt trainer. In other words, his job was to go ahead and take colts and train them to ride, to race or whatever. This is a horse trader. He was responsible to go and trade horses from the farmer to the track or whatever happened. This is for the post. This would be a mailman. This is for the post mailman, and also Andre had one similar to this with this design in his auction, but it's also for the telegrapher. This makes reference to the guy that operated the telegraph. And you notice, just backing up here 1 minute, now you can start seeing some of the characteristics. If you didn't know, I said they're cousins to regimentals. You can look here and you can see some of the characteristics of a regimental. This is for an Eisenbahn worker, and this particular one had to do, he was a gate guard at the road to go and make sure the gate was down when the train came by. This is for a porter working on the railroad. Job there was to go ahead and just be a porter, not a conductor, but a porter. Here, this is a Eisenbahn worker that had to do with the locomotives, and this is not porcelain now. This is pottery, okay? And for pottery, I don't think it's as good as the porcelain, but that's a personal opinion. But they worked in maintaining the engines of the locomotives of the various the trains. This is a fire brigade worker. And a lot of times they had fire brigades, similar, we call them firemen today, but they had the fire brigades, and this was to commemorate that. Again, this is not porcelain, this is pottery. This is a road repairman. His job was to go ahead, and he's one that had a little guild. I don't know exactly what happened. He must have played the horses or something. But anyway, his job was to go ahead and keep the roads clean and to patch the holes. This is a little hard to see, but this is what for a bridge worker or bridge builder. And again, it's a coat of arms, and this is pottery. It's not porcelain. This has to do with the mauler or an artist. He was a painter in this particular case, okay? And not the kind that paints houses. This was the type that would do scenes or whatever. Maybe made a Rembrandt, I don't know. This, Andre had one in his auction that was pottery. This is actually a painter. But if you look at it very closely, it really isn't a painter, okay? That's the general category. But if you look at the side, this was actually a sign painter. And he did signs and made signs for the various shops around the community of the Dorp. Again, you notice the prism lid and the characteristics of the regimental. This is for a photographer, okay? This is one of the later ones, okay? Probably about 1920, 25. And they took pictures. This is for a potterer, the topher. And you can see him at his wheel making the pots. Now, it does have a name on it, but it's on the lid. It would be a lot better if it had it on the top band, in my opinion. This is for a tile or brick maker, and you can see the oven or kiln where they fired these daggone things, and the actual translation is for tile or brick maker. This is for a printer. Now, for a long time, I thought this was guy for the book binder, but actually it's for a printer. Book drucker is printer. This is for a scribe or clerk or something like this. And this is not a very common to find. And if you really look at this, that scribbling right there, it does say hoc lieb and tribute to. This is for a singer. They were singing, they go around and whatever they did, and this is a tribute for the singer. And this is a fairly good occupational stein, but it doesn't have, I don't know how you make a bunch of pictures of someone singing. Maybe you see their tonsils, I don't know. This is for somebody that was into music. Don't know what kind of instrument they played. I don't think it was a harp. That's just a symbol for music, but they participated in music. This is one of my favorites, and this is for a priest. And this is very finely done, and all that's laid in gold. And this was given to a father of village or the priest or clergy person in the area. This is for the cook. Now, yesterday I really would like to have had that other stein because it was for the female cook. Okay? This is for the male cook. And this is sort of rare. I agree with Andre in that. Probably his other one's very rare because I've never seen a female before. Like I said, they didn't make that many occupations with women. But this is for the male cook. Okay, now we're to the baker. And again, this is a stein that goes the whole way around all the series. And a lot of the occupations, unfortunately, are very, very dark. And you really have to get them under bright light and a magnifying glass to study and see what they're involved. This is for a shoemaker. Now, I'm going to show you some steins a little bit later, a series of pewter. But I call them cobbler. The earlier people that worked with shoes were known as cobblers. They later were called shoe workers or shoemakers. And you heard the name shoemaker before. This has to do with a brewery. And I'm going to show you the full scene of this. You can see Gabrinus here with the coat of arms in the front. And then on the side, you can see where they brought in the hops and the walkway. And then on the other side, you can see the vat where they went ahead and made the beer. Again, if you looked at the top and didn't look at the bottom here, you could say, my gosh, that's almost one of those wonderful regimentals. This is for a blacksmith, okay? And they broke out yesterday in Andre's auction. They had one for a blacksmith stamper. They have a blacksmith hoofer, and then they had a blacksmith that just made things like wrought iron and all those. This is for a butcher. And of course, this is one of the common ones around you see with all kinds of pictures. This is for a tailor, okay? And you can see them ironing there with the ironing board and doing their things. And on the back, they have somebody they're measuring to go and make a suit or a petticoat. This is for a chimney sweep. Of course, these guys were in demand because you shake their hand and everything else. You had luck for the whole particular day. This is for a spangler or a roof or tin maker. Actually, it's better. The translation is tin. They made the copper in the roofs, the gutters, and all that. Now, this is my only American stein. This is a couple individuals who were into Munich. They were probably down near Bergman or whatever, and it says Frank the Jeweler. And on the side, there's some scene. There was 3 guys, all buddies, coming from an area. And you can see scenes. I didn't make pictures of them right here, but they're sitting there. So he brought it back, the jeweler that brought it back as a souvenir with the English translation. This is a very odd one and rare. This is for a fine gold worker. And what they would do is sift through all the sand and the pebbles to get the gold. And some people also said that these people had to do with gold leaf. They would take this gold after it was done and then make it into gold leaf to use for their picture frames and all the things they needed to do. So fine gold worker. This is a different one, and this is for a bottle filler. Now this is a woman, and what she did is her job was to fill bottles for Lemo and all these type of things, Sprudel or whatever it might be in Germany. They had the flip-top porcelain tops. This is for a hat maker, okay, or milliner, as we would say today. And it shows them sizing a hat and getting ready to give it to their customer. And again, that was not porcelain, it was pottery. This is now a cooper, which they made barrels, okay? And you have two translations, and it's sort of different. This is a good Stein. It's nice and tall. It has a date on there, 1929. The people, it's very good color, and it's great. Then you have the Durst of a Büttner, which had to do a little more, and they would take the barrels and make the staves and things like that. They were not so much like the other one to assemble the barrels. They more or less made the staves and whatever to get things done. This particular Stein is for, I have to look at that, I can't even tell it from here. I think this is for a harness maker. No, I'm sorry, this is for a wagon maker. And what their job was to make wheels and wagons. Wagon maker. Now this is a schlosser or a key maker. Now you had two types. You had some of them that actually made the keys, and then some of them that would go and install them and make the wrought iron or whatever to go with the occupation. This is the guy that would go to the house or the building or the firm and put the locks and the iron works or eisen, the wrought iron, I guess, or whatever. Now this guy is the same thing as schlosser, but his job was to make the keys and the locks that this other guy took out to do their thing. This is a dark style, and this is for an eisen worker. And what he did is he is as close to a translation as a tool and die maker. And they would turn things out of iron. Okay, and you can see he's working. It's very dark, and I apologize for that. It's hard to take and capture. But he's turning on a lathe metal to get something to make a die. Now we're getting into some of the shield type of things. This is for a knife sharpener, scissors sharpener. And they would go around from door to door sharpening your knives and scissors. This is for a glazer. Henri had one of those in his auction yesterday, the same type of Stein, and I have never seen a glazer other than with the symbol here. So it might be a full picture somewhere, but I don't know. Now this is for a furnace stoker. His job was to go ahead and attend the furnace or the fire to keep everything warm in the building, and you can see the tools here or whatever in his crest to do that. This had to do with a roofer, and this actually on here, if you read it, had to do with a slate roofer. His job was to go ahead and put slate on the roofs to go and make everything perfect so you didn't melt when it rained. This is a mechanic or machinist, excuse me. You can see the big machine in the back, and it shows that it's a wonderful Stein. It shows exactly what they're doing. It has to do with a machinist. This is for an electrical generator plant where they had a turbine to go ahead and generate the power, and you can see this is an electrical worker. This has to do with a mechanic, and his job was to go ahead and fix all the machines that were broken, and I don't know what else, but a mechanic. This now we had to do with a Zimmerman or a Schneider, and they actually made large furniture. And here you can see them putting the baby cribs together, and this is sort of a unique picture. This is also a woodworker, a joiner as they called it, and I have a full body with this. You can see the guy working here at his lathe, the pulleys in the top. On the side you can see the guy working the bandsaw with the pulleys there. They would cut the raw wood to make whatever they had to do. The guy would turn it in the middle, and then they would go and assemble it in the back to make some type of a furnish. But very good description. That's what I mean, handle to handle. It has a full scene. This is a Zimmerman, a carpenter, but this actually, and we believe, had to do with a boat builder, talking and seeing what happens with the lighthouse in the back, the boat here in the foreground or the background right behind the guy in that particular saw. It looks like this guy is a boat builder, the Zimmerman. Again, a Zimmerman now, but you can look at this, and what would you guess they did? He was a rough frame constructionist, right? They were the ones that took the wood and put it together and made the rough framing of the house. So that's the type of work that he did. But a Zimmerman, he could do a multitude of things. This is, and Andre had two of these in his auction yesterday, a traveling carpenter. And they would go from door for village to village to help the people to do their thing, because they had the trade, they had the training, and the other people could not work in that because they hadn't been to trade school. This has to do with the harness maker or the saddler. They made saddles, harnesses, or whatever for all the horses that they used for transportation. This had to do with a Steinmetz, or a stone worker. In this particular case, you look at it and we assume that this had to do with brick steins. They're a mason laying steins. Or not steins, bricks, excuse me. This is a Steinmetz. Again, they were laying cobblestones. Their job was to lay cobblestone, cut the stone, and everything else. And when I was in Germany, I used to like to watch these guys work, because what they would do, they would sit there with a little hammer and chip away, cut the stone, they would lay it, then they'd take a drink of beer, then they'd go back and chip, do the same thing, take a drink of beer, and they'd do that all day. It seems like for every cobblestone they put down, they'd take a big swig of beer. That was my kind of work. Now this had to do with a stucco worker, okay, and I have the full scene for this, and you can see the variety here. It has their coat of arms. You go to the port side, you can see the guy putting the decorated ceilings in and all that with the stucco, and then you see the other side. They had to do with making the building design, and also in the background, it's very hard to see, they made the statues or figures, or sort of sculpt a little bit. Stucco. This is the coal miner, which you saw a little different, and it has the scenes which we saw earlier, and it always says good luck in the front. Wherever you see a miner's stein, it always usually has good luck on it. Desirable stein. This is the miller, okay? And just a miller, exactly what it says. This has to do with the weaver, Weber. Now, a lot of our names, see, you can go and trade. If you look at the German names, a lot of you don't realize this probably, but a lot of your last names translate into some type of profession, and they picked that up when they came to America. So this would be for the Weber. This has to do with the basket maker or the wicker maker. Okay, they would make furniture, baskets, or whatever, and this is what they did, making baskets, wicker. This particular stein had to do with a hotel servant. Again, now you see the coat of arms, and if you see that, it's a satchel. He's some type of suitcase there in the back, so you could say he was either a hotel servant or a bellhop. I think in this particular case, this was a bellhop because of the luggage or whatever, but I'm not exactly sure. It's hard to tell when you just see the coat of arms and not the picture. That's why it's so much more desirable to get them doing something in their trade. This is the same thing. Now this is a porter, or not a porter, but excuse me, a bellhop. And what you see is he's just taken out the luggage and put it in the back of this car. Now you don't see that many motorized vehicles, and that's why I sort of extended this to 1935 to show you some of the vehicles, because they're sort of rare finding occupational steins with some type of a motor vehicle. And that's what this is. He's taking the bellhop, or the hotel servant taking the things out to the car. This is the house miser, or the caretaker, and his job is to go and get the horses ready, take care of the premise. Of course, they probably work for someone with quite a lot of money. This is a very desirable stein. It has the name, it has the occupation, it has the verses on the side. It's fairly full leaf. It has one of the main three verses. Very desirable stein, in my opinion. This, now we're going to get into the transportation type of steins, and we have the ones that move goods, and then we have the ones that move people. This is a guy that used to haul kegs of beer around, okay? And I have two of these just to sort of show you. This is a full. It has the guy's name. You can see the solid mount on the top. And then you have this one, and see, it doesn't have the name. It has the verse, but I think the first one's a lot more desirable, am I in your way, than this one. Same type of occupation. This particular guy took sprudel or pop or soda and hauled it around. And that's what that is on top, bottles of limo. This now is a guy that delivered for a particular brewery, and he's delivering bottles of beer to the stores, or they used to go around to the house, and each week they'd make their rounds to the villages, and then people would put out their empty bottles and get the new one. This is what he did. He was a beer deliverer to the houses. Uh-oh. This is a transportation, and I call this the dry goods or covered transportation. If something had to go from village to village or whatever to be moved, this is what they would use to get this type of wagon with a cover on so it wouldn't get wet. This particular guy was a milk. This is a very desirable Stein. It has a prism top, very good coloring, and they actually took the milk from the farms to the dairy. This was their main purpose, to do that. But he's actually a foreman to take and drive, a transportation transporter, driver, whatever you want to call him. It has quite a few translations. This is a sort of a unique one to get. This guy hauled oil. Now, they didn't have oil heating then, but they did have, they needed, a lot of people didn't have electricity, and they would take the oil around to let them. This particular Stein has to do with a farmer transportation. This is actually nothing more than a farm wagon, but what they would do is this depicted they would go when they had the harvest, and they would go and help each other or rent out and buy, and they would use this to bring in hay or snips or turnips or whatever they had to do. But this was a farm-type wagon driver, a Kirchner. This is a driver, and this is now we sort of get in the borderline of taking people and goods. Postilion, which is a mail mover, transporter. But they also, when they did that, it was like a stagecoach, and they had people in there. So they took the mail from town to town. They also carried the people. This is a open type of wagon. Again, you can see taking people from point to point, and that was him to operate the driver. Then we get into a closed type carriage, very similar to a regimental. Here we get into a half and half, the driver's on the outside and the people, and there's a particular name for this, and I forget what it is right now. But to go again, you can see, very desirable. This has to do now with a guy that's responsible for delivering beer. And you translate this, it means he's the lead or the foreman of the beer workers. And that's what he did to deliver beer. And he's in a motorized vehicle, a truck. This has to do with a chauffeur. An occupation as a chauffeur. Again, you see them people going out and going for a merry ride. It has all the detail, full scene, very, very desirable occupational Stein. This has to do with a tram operator. He said that that's one of the reasons that they didn't have many of them, and they were sort of scarce. This is a 1 liter size Stein, porcelain. Tram operator. Now we're going to talk about what we call dips. Depressions in pewter. I have just a couple examples. It doesn't fit into the porcelain category, but I thought it might just be interesting to see them because it's another type of occupational. And you see it's just a pewter. These have old dates on, like 1701, 1702. And at first I thought that's when the trade or whatever was established, and I thought maybe that was the occupational when I first got into that. Well, it's not right. These were probably made about 1880, 1900. And I don't know what that date means. If anybody knows, let me know. But they're 1802, 1750, 1702, or whatever. But anyway, to get back to it, this is a cobbler, not a shoemaker, but it translates to a cobbler. This is a tailor. You can see him sitting there in the window, and he has a needle, a little needle in his hand, and he's sewing. This is your blacksmith. He has the anvil there pounding a piece of metal, making whatever. And actually that translates into a hoof maker. He's actually making a horseshoe for a roof. This is very dark and very hard to see, but if you looked in that, it's a printer's table in there, and he's setting type, and he's getting ready. This is an occupational, pewter occupational for a pewterer. Or printer, not a pewter, printer. This has to do with a baker. Everybody can recognize that. That's sort of the fun with occupationals. You can pick them up, look at them, and try to guess and see what that is without actually understanding the language. But this creates a baker. This particular occupation is a guy working with wood. It's a woodworker or joiner, okay? And he mainly worked on, he has a plane in his hands, going ahead and planing a surface, so he's some type of a cabinet maker or joiner. Then you get into this one, and this actually, most of these are a Fräulein or a waitress. But actually, if you look at the engraving on this in the back, it's given to a philosophy doctor that went to Spain, and on her return, the village people gave it to her to say thank you for returning, Herr Doktor. But actually, when you usually see that, it's a waitress. This is your locksmith. Okay, and one of the things I want to point out on this, if you notice, all these have had a shield on top, and it's usually saying something with the person's occupation, or not the occupation, but the name and the date on top of that. Now I'm going to show you three that has to do with, this is a woodworker, and you can see now we do not have the depression in the middle. We have some things attached, but we look at the lid, okay, and we determine what the occupational is. And if we look at that, you can see a guy on his lathe working, and he's some type of a joiner, lathe worker. He could make kegel or pins for a bowling alley or kegling alley. We look at this and we see, okay, we saw one before that was for a locksmith. It had the indent and it had him doing his thing, but now we see those people on the top, and what they're doing is they're making a strap for a hinge or something in the locksmith. We look at this one and we see this is a cooper or a barrel maker again. You can see the barrel in the middle with the axe and whatever in the top, and we look at the people, you can see them actually putting the rim with their hammers on the barrel. I just thought you'd be interested in those. Now we just talk a little bit about occupationals. These are really occupational steins. This one was given as a birthday gift. Very nice stein, very clean, just like the day it rolled out the shop. But the wife gave it to her husband, who was a stone mason, okay, and to commemorate his birthday. And you see them like this, but I don't consider these actually true occupationals. This had to do with, and I got this from Ron Fox many, many years ago, and it had to do with a warehouse storage, which relates to the occupationals. And actually, this is when they had grain and whatever, and they brought their products before they sold them to the big cities. This is where they would bring the products. And McGregor, and the interesting thing about this is that it has one seam and it has some little seams in the bottom, but this was made in Czechoslovakia. Now, I got that from a master steinologist, right? And you could tell on the bottom, John said that this was made in Czechoslovakia. He traced it back, and I thought it'd be interesting to say. So we do know that some occupational steins were made in Czechoslovakia. This is an interesting stein. It's pottery, very unusual, and I call this your import-export maritime stein, okay? It's not really a true occupational, but the nice thing about this is you have the maritime guy in the middle, and then if you look on the side, the port side, you have all the flags of the country with the name of the countries, and it tells you in millions of marks what the import and export was to that country for that year. Now, what I hope to do is to go to the library someday and see if I can get those numbers to match and see what happens. And on the other side, you have the same thing. You have the countries import, export of what they did in millions of marks. Very desirable stein. This is one that I put up. It's a stone salt glaze, stoneware. And the reason I put this up, because a lot of the occupations, and we're going to do some articles, Rich was saying you need to write some articles a little bit about, but some of the different types. Of course, on the bottom you'd say that's a tailor. The top would be the butcher, okay? And on the bottom, if you read this, it says, those who work very hard during the day should not deny a person from drink at night, is the translation of that. And it has about 9 or 12, I think 9 different symbols for the various occupations around the stein, but it's sort of a good way to end this thing. There's a side with the other one. Again, you can see some of the woodworker, the engineer, the pretzel guy, locksmith, cook. Okay, that's all the slide. But this is one of the first times occupationals are very, very interesting to me. And the reason I got involved with Occupational Steins, and when I first went to Germany, everybody had Metlock. That was the big name. Of course, I couldn't afford Metlock and didn't know how to spell it, didn't know anything about it. And being from Pennsylvania originally, I knew they had shaving cups, and they had these little things about that tall with a scene on it. I knew they were going for about $50 or $75. So I said, if those little things like this are going for that, then these big ones that you could buy for about $50 or $60 in Germany should be just as good. And that's how I got started. Okay, in the beginning, I asked you some questions. And by now, you should know what made occupational so important to the Germans. It was their occupational system, the way they had to go to a trade school to get a different occupation. It was standardization of that trade system, part of the German culture. In fact, when I was over in Germany, my neighbor had a wood shop. And we were very, very good friends and did everything together, and I made all kinds of things, and he'd get the biggest kick out of it. But he would never allow me to operate his machinery. And the reason was because I had never been to a trade school. And because I hadn't been to a trade school to understand how to do that, I could not turn that on switch on. I just got the light, so I proved I could, see? The Germans' education system determines their occupation and actually to a certain degree their status. The system forces one to have much dedication and pride to their occupation to become a master craftsman. And when they get to that level, it is really, really great. We have talked about the characteristics of porcelain steins, their lids, their thumb lifts, bodies, and lithopanes. You know what constitute, in my opinion, what makes a desirable occupational stein and why some occupations are rarely found. We talked about that. We talked about PIMPAT. I want you all to remember that. We'll help you remember the various categories of the occupational steins that we talked about. And hopefully, when you go to the auctions, you won't bid on these things. They're rare. But you'll have a wonderful understanding of what's involved, and when you go out looking and see an occupational, you just won't turn up your nose and say, oh my gosh, there's one of those things. You really have to study them. It's a lot of fun, and we hope to do some articles and things to dive into this, but this is just a general overview of what I consider the occupational category is all about. Thank you very much.